can or Coke in another can. Are those the exact same thing?
Very, very similar, yes. Coca-Cola bottling is very, very consistent in putting Coke in those cans. And I think the only way we're going to ascertain whether he's blowing smoke or speaking the truth is by checking him out.
Jerome in the 4th century edited the Bible and cut out certain things that he didn't want in there.
Come on!
This guy tries to use Coca-Cola to win an argument against Jesus. So make sure to watch till the end because I have a Bible verse that will tie all of this together. Shout out to Cliff and give me an answer. Let's get into it.
Coke in another can. Are those the exact same thing?
Very, very similar, yes. Coca-Cola bottling is very, very consistent in putting Coke in those cans.
Very consistent, but once again, your relativism is showing up again. You could say the exact same thing about rocks, the cracks in there, the air we breathe, the hair on our heads. So why should we put more importance on one subject as opposed to another?
Okay, it's real simple. There's only one way I'm going to get to know who you are, and that is if you choose to open up and tell me your name and tell me what you like and dislike and show me your character. If you don't do that, if you remain silent or if you lie to me, I'm never going to get to know you. Well, the same thing is true with God. If God exists, the only way I'm going to get to know God is if God opens up, tells me God's name, tells me what he likes and dislikes, tells me what his character's like. If God remains silent or if God lies, I'm never going to get to know God. Now, Jesus Christ made this incredible claim to be God, opening up, revealing the truth about who God is. Now, Jesus is either blowing smoke, he's either lying, or else he's speaking the truth. And I think the only way we're going to ascertain whether he's blowing smoke or speaking the truth is by checking him out, reading the Gospels.
He's dead.
No, man, he rose from the dead.
Human beings wrote that. Jerome in the 4th century edited the Bible and cut out certain things that he didn't want in there. There are other parts and variants of the Catholic Bible and the Christian Bible where parts of the story are left out, such as Jonah. In the Catholic Bible, I believe it's in the back. It's under this hidden area. So how can you say there's this study of hermeneutics talking about human interpretation of the Bible and biblical norms? Are those ethically relative at those times or relative now? What about sexism in the Bible? Was it relative back then or now? Were they incorrect or are we incorrect now? Is it our interpretations using normal values of the 20th century applied to the Christian Bible that are different? Or are we all just screwed up? Is it just relativism? How can we trust what's written?
Well, let me ask you. If I stand out here and say, I'm a follower of Christ, if I tell you I take Jesus seriously, I go up to this person, punch him in the face, knock him out, steal their money, what are you going to say to me?
You believe in the writings of other people writing about Jesus. It's a second-generation copy. It's been translated and misconstrued, potentially. So I'm going to say that you don't know exactly what he said specifically.
Let me phrase it another way. If I say I'm a follower of Christ, and after I finish speaking out here, I go out and womanize, what are you going to say to me?
That you womanized.
You're not going to use the word hypocrite?
Depending on what your own interpretations of the Bible are, which varies from person to person, like you pointed out before, if you want to state that your beliefs say that it's incorrect, then yes, I would say that you are being hypocritical.
You mean you're going to be confronted by a guy who gets on television, preaches about Jesus, and then goes out and womanizes and rips people's money off, and you're going to be cool on that and say, well, it's just a matter of interpretation?
Sure.
Oh, come on!
That's crazy. Relativism is dangerous, but also the Bible hasn't been changed over years and things weren't added and taken out just because they wanted to control whatever they wanted. And also, the Bible completely flipped everything and changed everything from sexism to loving your neighbor, to the slaves, to people, to show that everyone has value. The Bible's the one who helped bring that along.
Come on! If I say I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and Asians and African Americans are inferior to Caucasians, you're not going to use the word hypocrite to describe me?
If you explain that every single one of your beliefs, and it says in the Bible, under your belief system, that it is incorrect to treat people of different races or colors incorrectly, and you believe in that, then yes, you would be a hypocrite.
Sir, I like what Mark Twain said. Mark Twain said, it ain't the parts of the Bible I don't understand that disturb me. It's the parts of the Bible I do understand that disturb me. And you know very well, you don't need a PhD in hermeneutics. You don't need a PhD in New Testament studies to know that if someone claims to be a follower of Christ and they go out and womanize, they go out and rip people's money off, They go out and have racist attitudes, that they are being hypocritical, because clearly in the Gospels, Jesus says, put your faith in me and do not commit adultery, do not commit fornication, do not have a racist attitude, and don't steal people's money. Instead, respect people and love people, and show it by the way you treat them. Please, come on, let's be honest with each other.
It's an emotive statement that you're making right now.
Emotive. It's called reality, sir.
If you want to consider it that way, it's a 20th century emotivist standpoint, where you're taking basic values, adding facts to that, and coming up with your own moral conclusions.
No,
You
sir.
agree about the facts that
I'm
are
not
going
talking
on.
about
Your
any
basic
20th
values-
century phenomena. In the first century, the followers of Jesus Christ shared their bed with nobody and their money with everybody. And that was in stark contrast to the culture that they lived in, where people shared their bed with everybody and their money with nobody. And I can promise you 2,000 years later, followers of Christ who are committed to Christ share their bed with nobody except their spouse, but they share their money with everybody. They're generous. And for you to tell me that's a culturally relative bias that we've laid on Jesus Christ is totally erroneous. Read the Gospels. Jesus is brutally clear. Sexual impurity is wrong. Being generous with your money and sharing with God's unfed children is very good.
That's so good. Jesus talks a lot about loving your neighbor, helping those in need. When Jesus was talking to his followers, whatever you did for the least of these, you did unto me. He wants us to love our neighbors. And all of these morals that we have in our Western society that helps us thrive is from a Christian biblical worldview.
Do you hold that the Bible as a document, you would take that document as beginning from Genesis all the way to the end of the Gospels?
All the way to Revelation.
So you would expect consistencies between the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Yes, sir.
So how do you explain certain laws that I believe even Jesus himself followed that Christians today don't follow, such as circumcision, dietary laws, and other stuff?
You bet. When you read the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament, there are a truckload of laws in there. And the main point is God is holy, and he's calling these Jewish people to be separate from all the cultures around them and to be holy. Holy means morally pure, but it also means separate. And so he's calling a people out to be separate. And by gollies, when they followed those laws in Leviticus, they were definitely different. Separate from all the peoples around them. Then you read the Gospels in the book of Acts, and you see that Gentiles begin to put their faith in Christ. And obviously one of the disputes in the first century church was, when Gentiles put their faith in Jesus, do they have to keep kosher kitchens? Do they have to hold to all the laws that we as Jews do? And the clear decision of the first century eyewitnesses of Christ was, no, Gentiles do not have to become cultural Jews and follow all those laws, but they do have to follow the moral law of God, like the Ten Commandments that Jesus reiterates in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. So you're right, there was a struggle there. And Peter had to be confronted by Paul. In the book of Galatians, Paul writes, when Peter started separating himself from the Gentiles, because they weren't all circumcised, like all the Jews were. So you're right, that change is recorded.
You want to look at all these different religions and decide on one and follow that. But before you really accept Jesus and before you actually look into it, you should have a criteria for which one are you going to accept and why. So can you go through maybe some of the criteria? You already mentioned that in order to really know God in the Islamic faith, you have to read Arabic. So you said you had a philosophical problem with that. It seems like one of your criteria is ease of readability or ease of getting to know God. So I just want you to go through maybe what your criteria is before we really think about why Jesus. How does Jesus fit in that criteria?
Okay, great question. My point about having a problem with having to learn Arabic in order to know God is not just out of the blue, I got a problem with that. Rather, it begins with the incredible respect that the Quran communicates for Jesus. Muhammad taught that Jesus was a prophet of God. In fact, a devout Muslim has far more respect for Jesus than the typical American. A devout Muslim believes Jesus was born of a virgin, ascended to heaven, and is coming back a second time. That's a lot more than a lot of Americans believe. So a devout Muslim has far more respect for Jesus than the typical American. But you see, my philosophical problem is this. Jesus comes and says, I'm for the world. Come to me. You don't have to learn Greek or Aramaic. Come to me. And Muslims respect him and say, that's good, that's good. But then they say the real miracle is the Quran. And in order to really understand the real miracle of God, you have to learn Arabic. Well, how can you move from Jesus, who's for the whole world, to saying, come to me, in any language? All of a sudden you move to Arabic saying, okay, you got to really learn Arabic in order to understand a miracle of God. That's the internal inconsistency.
What are some of the other criteria that you have for deciding on which one is reliable? Because you said you have to have your sources being reliable. So how do you construct a criteria for that source being reliable as opposed to another? Because all of them...
Good. I insist that both the Quran and the New Testament give us very accurate, historically fair presentations of both Muhammad and Jesus. What's the criteria that I personally use to determine credibility of a historical document?
And not just for the Quran and the New Testament, but also for the Old Testament and for Buddha and for Confucius and all that.
You bet. Whenever I'm confronted by a document that claims to be historical, I'm a skeptic, but not a cynic. I don't reject history as bunk. That's why I would debate someone who says the Holocaust never took place. It's just a Jewish plot. No, we can know something historically. Now, I've got 4 tests that I use to determine historicity. If you don't like my tests, I promise I won't take it personally, but I will press you. You come up with your own tests that you use consistently. My 4 tests are internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. First one, internal consistency. I read the document. If there are major contradictions within the document, I question its reliability.
For the Bible versus the Quran, there's so many different contradictions to which one is right. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And the Quran says that Jesus isn't God. You can't get to God through Jesus. You have to go straight to him.
Mark, Luke, and John, you'll notice there's a tremendous internal consistency. Second test, literary style. Is the document couched in the following type of language? Once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wink and Blink and a Nod took a boat ride. That's fairy tale. That's what that literary style is. The literary style of the Gospels is, at this time, in this place, with these people around, this took place. That's historical narrative.
But isn't Genesis written the first way?
Good.
It says, in the beginning there was this, and then there was... And it doesn't really... It's very poetic. It actually repeats that God says this was good, and it's more...
You are absolutely correct. Great point. Genesis chapter 1 is comprised of 8 4-line Hebrew poems. Very good. You read well. That's why I would not treat Genesis chapter 1 as historical narrative, because that's not the literary style. And you go to the Psalms, and it's all poetry, isn't it? And you go to the book of Revelation, and it's apocalyptic literature. That sure is not historical narrative. That's apocalyptic, highly symbolic literature, Revelation. But the Gospels, where we read about Jesus, are historical narrative. At this time, he did this. He said that. We saw him. But the Gospels do contain parable, allegory, simile, metaphor. When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, he's not claiming to be a 100-watt light bulb. I mean, that's not fair. You've got to allow him to use allegory, metaphor. Okay. The third one is archaeology. Are we talking about the island of Atlantis? No, we're talking about Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, Rome. And the fourth one is manuscript evidence. How many manuscripts and how close to the date of the actual writing of the document are they? The New Testament that we have today has nothing to do with the Latin Vulgate of Jerome. The New Testament that we have today in English is based on over 5,200 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript dated from the 1st through the 10th century AD, found from Rome, Italy, down around the Mediterranean to Alexandria, Egypt, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. There's no document from antiquity that can even approach the New Testament Gospels in manuscript evidence. That's why I accept it as historically reliable. But so do I do that with the Quran. The Quran is a very accurate presentation of what Muhammad taught. And the teachings of the Buddha have been very accurately preserved. And the Vedas and Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita of Hinduism, very accurate. I mean, people went to painstaking ends to accurately transmit these documents. So read them. And while you read them, ask yourself, what does the evidence point to as being reliable?
But how do you
And I would say for Jesus is the most reliable. The evidence behind it, how the disciples behaved when Jesus died, what were they like before and what were they like after they claimed to see Jesus resurrect. That's the big difference. Their lives were completely flipped upside down. They changed their life for Jesus because they saw Jesus after he died. They were willing to die for him. So now I have a Bible verse that will tie all of this together. John 1:1 says, "In the beginning, the world already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." So guys, go to God today. Know that he loves you. Jesus died on the cross for your sins so that you could be saved. So I encourage you to go to him today. Admit that you're a sinner. Believe that he died on the cross and rose again in 3 days so that you can be saved. Make him your Lord and Savior of your life. In the description below, you can fill out if you want to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please comment down below your thoughts on this, whatever that may be. Please subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I know we could do it with your help. So thank you for all your love and support. It means the world to me. And guys, you might like this video here. Peace.